All right, I hear from a lot of people that they're sort of stymied by the API of their test runner and their assertion library, and trying to understand what is the syntax, what are the sort of arcane incantations that you have to do to write your tests. And so I want to try and demystify that a little bit because once you understand the moving parts, the test runner, the test file, and the assertions, it actually becomes a lot clearer. So I want to break this down. I think this will probably only take about 5 minutes, and I hope will hopefully give you a lot more clarity on how to write your tests. I'm going to use Jest because that's what I know. But what I'm telling you is true of in Python using PyUnit or unit test, in Ruby using RSpec. The three sort of main pieces here of your test runner, your test file, and your assertions are pretty universally true. So those are the three things that I want you to take away from this: test runner, test file, and assertions. So the test runner, in this case, Jest, is a program. It is an executable. It is generally run from the command line that looks for spec files, looks for test files, looks for files of a known format or somewhere somehow configured or specified how to find them that it can run. That's basically it, right? It sets up a lot of conventions of what it expects to find in those files, but at its core, the test runner is looking for some test files. It's going to execute them, and it's going to, if it runs into no errors, it's going that test run is going to exit with code 0. If it runs into an error, it's going to exit with some non-zero code, which is how the computer knows that something went wrong. So in this case, what I've got is a bare spec file. So this is a convention that Jest uses. It looks for any files called .spec.js. And I'm just going to run Jest against it. I'm going to run it with the watch all flag so that it just keeps running as I make changes. But what you'll see here is that it's going to fail. It's going to fail because it says your test suite must contain at least one test. So what happened there was Jest ran, it found my spec file, it loaded it into memory, and it attempted to execute it, but it didn't find any tests in our file, so it failed. So let's write a test. So you'll probably recognize this format if you've used JavaScript at all for writing tests, but it looks a lot like this. It would look a lot different in Python or Ruby or some other language. But for right now, stick with me. We're talking Jest. We'll write a describe block, my first test inside, which should pass, and an assertion. Expect 1, 2 equal 2. Now that's confusing. Stick with me. So when I save this, Jest is going to come back to this. It's going to rerun. It's going to find our spec file. It's going to load into the global scope, describe as a function, test as a function, and expect as a function, right? You notice I didn't import any of those into the scope here. Those come from Jest. If I were to try and run this file just bare from the command line, if I said node index.spec.js, it would fail. It would say, I don't know what you're talking about calling describe or test or expect. None of those are in scope. So Jest is taking care of putting those things in scope so we don't have to import them every time. And then what it does, this basic mechanism is where it's going to differ per framework, but you have some kind of grouping mechanism. So in here, that's describe. In other languages, other more object-oriented languages, you might create a class called it that represents your tests and has a bunch of methods that are prefixed with the word test or double underscore test or something that signals to the test runner that this is a test to be run and it should execute it. So in this case, this is what is happening in Jest. It looks for any describe blocks. Those are optional though. We could just put test out in the top level scope. But when it sees test, it knows this is a test to run. The first argument here is a label. So you'll see, in fact, I'll just run it. Now, when I run it, it spits out the label for my describe block. And then you see the label for the test that should pass. What happened here is it executed this code. It executed this function. That function is your test. The second argument in this case is your test. Or if you're working with something where your test is a method on a class, that method body is going to be your test. But in here, the convention that Jest is expecting is the convention that it's setting up is that if it runs to completion without hitting an error, so I can just comment this out and do nothing, it will pass. So you'll see it's going to tell me that my test passes. If it encounters any kind of error, so I could just manually throw an error. If it encounters any kind of error, it calls that a failed test. So your assertion library is simply a thing that compares values and throws errors if they do not conform to the way you'd like them to compare. So in this case, expect is a function that Jest provides us. Expect returns an object. So we could actually do this in two calls. We could say const result equals expect one, result dot to equal two. Now this is very unreadable. Like they've named things in the way that to make it so that it's obvious that you say expect one dot to equal whatever. But I'm showing you what is actually going on here. Expect is returning an object. That object has a whole bunch of methods for asserting on this value. So we could say result dot to equal two. To equal is going to throw an error because 2 does not equal 1. So it should still tell us that it failed. Expected 2, received 1. A clearer way to say this would be const actual equals 1, const expected equals 2. Then we would say expect actual to equal expected. Again, still failing, right? We could do something like const actual equals 2 plus 3, and we expect that should equal 5. That should pass, right? 2 plus 3 does in fact equal 5. We can use anything we want here. It doesn't have to be expect ships with Jest, but you could use whatever you want. There's a library called assert that just ships with Node. So we could import, let's see if I can get this right, assert from assert. Actually, I have to use require here. We could just say assert actual equals expected. And if this is not true, this is how this particular library works, it will throw. And so now we should see that this is true. If we were to change this, then we would see our test fail. So that's what I want you to see. Test runner is Jest or whatever your test runner of choice, but test runner is the piece of software. It is the executable that is responsible for running your tests. Your test file conforms to whatever conventions your test runner sets up. They frequently cannot be run on their own, right? They're going to rely on a number of implicit things that are put into scope by your test runner. And then the assertion is 99% of the time, it is just something that throws an error. So there are libraries that are different ways of asserting that different values equal each other. Like that's basically all it is. Assertion libraries have all kinds of other things that are basically just developer ergonomic. So we could say like expect actual to be greater than whatever, or the one that I use a lot is expect something to throw. So if some action is expected to throw an error, that's a nicety that comes with your with the assertion library. So I hope this clarifies some things for you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.